Sasha, welcome to my podcast, Forbidden
Well,
Conversations.
thank you for having me, Twitter friend or ex-friend, I should say. You're not an ex-friend because
Ex
that sounds like
friend.
you're an ex-friend. She's my ex-friend,
It does.
but
We're
ex-friend, Twitter
exes.
friend.
We're exes, apparently. But we were never in a relationship. So this is
No,
a great start. We're off to a
we
great
have a
start.
contentious relationship on Twitter, but we're respectful of each other. I'd put it that
Respectfully
way.
contentious, which I think
Respectfully contentious.
is a good thing. I've never had, I
Yeah.
don't think, you know what it is? You've never been bad faith with me, and I don't think I've been bad faith with you. And I think that's why, we have very different viewpoints on a lot of things.
Yeah.
And it, I've never felt anything negative towards you,
Yeah.
despite that. And hopefully vice versa or
Yeah, no,
not.
I read your tweets and I don't find them to be bad faith at all. I find them to be very honest and very frank and caring and sensitive and intelligent. Sometimes I disagree with them and I will say so in public, but
Yeah.
I never look at your tweets and think, that I'm so angry that I want to unfollow you or attack you or, none of that. I would never take it personally because I think you make it pretty clear that you're just trying to be an objective person and sort of in the middle or, an
Yeah.
overseer rather than someone who takes a side.
And I try not to, I try to attack the ideas, not necessarily the person, with the exception of a few people who I just think are very dishonest and horrible. But most of the
Yeah.
time, but I think with you, I've never felt like you definitely disagree with me on things, and but I've had people who do it where it's like you could see that they're manipulating or it's like an attack and versus you're
Mm.
just disagreeing, which is a healthy thing, which is why I mean when we first connected on Twitter, it was Twitter then, it was just in the movie realm, like there was no political connection whatsoever. Probably followed you because you wrote movie content and I was in that same sphere as well. And then we somehow managed to move from that into the more, there's an element of opinion or politics. I think of it, I think of my commentary as being not so political. I think of it as being just social commentary.
Yeah, I think so
But you,
too.
yeah, okay, good.
Cultural, but see, people always say to me, why did you get political? And I say, well, I didn't get political. Hollywood got political. And so you have to be political if you're going to cut. If you want to write interesting content, you can't ignore that. I see so much of the film coverage now that's just unreadable to me, because it's so bland. It doesn't dive into any of the important issues that are happening. People are too afraid. So you have to be, I think you have to be political if you're going to cover film. Uh,
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, I think because the medium of film is often quite political, right? So, whether you want it to be or not, it's a lot of the content is has a perspective, right? And that's fair. That's part of what art is. It's a perspective, and I think where it doesn't resonate with people is where it becomes preachy.
mm,
And I think that's where somebody else I had talked to a while back, he said, it's the lack of subtext. Before, because Hollywood was always,
boy, that's a
right? Because
good
Hollywood,
observation.
it is a good observation. And it was
Yeah.
Chris, oh my gosh. It was, the reality is Hollywood was always full of all the movies had a perspective and some political message or some social message, but it didn't speak to the audience like a dumb person. It was subtext. And now I think this is what people really resent is that it just hits you over the head.
Hmm.
It's not that the messages are even inherently all bad. I think a lot of them are good. But when you treat your audience like a stupid person who needs to be preached to, I don't think you're going to get a very good reaction, but also you're not going to get very good content.
Yeah. Um, I was reading just yesterday, I was reading the Hays Code from 1930. I don't know if you've ever read that, but you should just trip yourself out sometime and read it.
Okay.
Um, it was guidelines put into Hollywood by, I think, Christian conservatives, and they had this, it's like this document, and it's so amazing because the Hays Code lasted from the 1930s through to the 1960s, and these guidelines are so strident. They're like, no woman can be overtly sexual unless it
Yeah.
leads to sin, right? It has to be her downfall. So that's one thing, but like everything is like, no marriage can be portrayed as anything other than aspirational, a good marriage, right? And if there's
Yeah.
any kind of things that fall out of that, it has to be portrayed in a bad. And Hollywood followed this for many years, but what's interesting is that we had artists who would push against that. Hitchcock, for instance, who played around with that and created some of the most amazing films ever made, the ones that, and all the film noir, that's why there's the femme fatale, because a woman like that has to be portrayed in a negative because of the Hays Code.
Mm.
So
Oh,
you
but I
have all
always
these
liked
great,
them.
I know, you have these great female characters that had to be bad, like
Bad
Marilyn
girls.
Monroe. Yeah. and
It's
and
very puritanical, right?
oh yeah,
I think
but it
Hollywood has always been puritanical. Like the Hays Code was a codified version of that, but I think we see that throughout,
well,
the
the
whole history of it.
pre-code era was very like today. That's the thing, is that nothing new under the sun. Everything is, you can find in history, the pendulum swings back and forth. Um, the pre-code movies are very full of all kinds of sex and every kind of sex you could ever imagine, and it was all that bad behavior that had to be cleaned up with the Hays Code. So it's always fun to go back and watch the pre-code movies, and then most of the time all of us grew up under this idea of what decent society is because of the Hays Code. We just didn't realize it. It was like reflected back at us from movies in such a all of society way, where everybody thought that we had to have a certain type of way we behave depicted on screen so that everybody knew what normal was. And it's fascinating. You read the Hays Code, it'll blow your mind, I'm telling you. So I see today's Hollywood like the woke code. It's the same thing, exactly. It's just a different type of behavior, but it's the same kind of rules. Nobody ever wrote it down. They don't need to because everybody knows the rules, but people don't break them. For instance, a gay character always has to be portrayed in a good light, right?
Hmm.
Um, the only kind of villains you can have are white men, like that sort of thing. And, all that stuff is in there. And so once you see it in a movie, you just check out because you already know what the movie is, because you know how it's going to end, you know how it can't end. There's no surprise to it, there's no storytelling. It's just, um, they want to deliver this instruction manual for you and how to think. This is how you are to think about things. And if you break those rules, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. So I hate that. I'm just going to say, hate it.
I would say most audiences hate it, right? Like, I think a lot of
Yeah.
people don't verbalize it because there is this kind of stigma to it where it's like if you say that you don't like certain things about the Puritan version of Hollywood right now, um, you're a racist or you're a bigot or whatever. Where in reality, most people they just think it's kind of bad content. They just think it's not treating them right, and it's not treating those groups that they're
Mm-mm.
trying to sort of push forward in a great way either, because it's cliche, it's stereotyped, it's not. I mean, real people of any type are messy and complicated, and there's heroes and there's villains and there's everything in between, and there's doctors and then there's thieves. I mean, everybody has that, and when you clean that up, when you sanitize it, I think it takes a lot. I mean, one thing that I would hear from friends of mine who were in writers' rooms is that they became so dangerous. And a writer's room is really where you play around with
Yeah,
ideas, including saying things that might seem a little bit offensive. I mean, we say
right.
things that are offensive. Sometimes it's an accident. Sometimes we have biases.
I know.
and it's okay because ultimately when you say it out loud, you have a mechanism by which other people can provide their own feedback, and you might reconsider even if you have certain negative thinking, or with but in particularly in a creative environment, you're playing around with characters, you're playing around with situations. Being offensive could be part of the discovery process, or creating a pathway forward. And when you take that away, everybody's like on edge and afraid to speak because somebody's going to report you, which is technically exactly what has been happening in some of the cases that I'm aware
Oh,
of. And
awful,
it's like,
awful.
yeah, it didn't even happen to my friends. It happened to other people in the writer's room. And that
Mm.
causes them to self censor and silence. And I know that people will immediately go, well, they just want to be bigots or whatever. But that's just not the truth. Like, I wrote a book about some of this stuff. And ultimately, I don't even think that it's like you should never cancel somebody. There are certainly situations like Diddy, or I'm saying his name wrong, am I?
No,
Uh,
it's right. I'm
is
going to
that the one?
report
Okay.
you.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
writing your name down. No.
No, I wasn't. I was like, because there's no, because there's two. There's one that's a good one, and there's one that's a bad one. I always get their names mixed up. The one who's going to prison or is in prison right now and standing trial is which
Sean
one?
Combs, Puffy
Sean
Combs,
Com
I
Puffy
think.
Combs.
Yeah,
So I
Puffy Combs.
is that the same person?
I
Is
think it
that Pete?
is. I think it's
Okay.
P. Diddy, yeah.
Okay, good. Oh, okay. Yeah, I got it right. Okay.
P. Diddy Combs. P. Diddy Combs, yeah.
I
Yes.
just didn't want to like
As
slander
opposed
the
to
wrong person.
Jay-Z, who was put in was accused, but then has now been absolved, I
Oh,
think.
has he? Oh, that's
Yeah, they
interesting.
she
Well,
retracted.
but this is one of those things like, okay, so if this guy is if the allegations are proven to be true, you probably want to cancel that person. Um, but I think for me is seeing how much it's over small, tiny things. And even in your case, like, so I recently found out that you had an incident where because somebody wrote an article about you with a headline that was somewhat misleading, you had lost all your advertisers and now you're sort of persona non grata. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it was like being in it really was like being in a Hitchcock movie because for 10 years I've always been the person who stood up for people being canceled. Like I don't know why, but I always felt like I needed to. I'll tell you something. After you've been canceled, it's a lot harder to be brave online than you used to be. It does cut into your confidence a little bit. It
Mm,
makes you scared and intimidated. But, I would stand up for my friends that were getting canceled or, Kevin Hart, who was shamed off of hosting the Oscars, or, movies that were being called racist. And I'd always put myself between the mob and the other person to stand up for them. And that brought a lot of heat on me for many, many years. So it was surreal to then have it happen to me. And I think it's happened to you too, right? To a little bit of
yeah,
a lesser degree. Yeah.
it
So I
has
want to hear
happened.
about yours too, but I'm just saying, like, until it's
Yeah.
happened to you, you don't really know.
It's definitely happened to me, although I would say my experience with it was that I actually became braver. But
Mm.
I think it was a big reason as to why I became outspoken about this kinds of stuff, and everything in general. I was always opinionated, but wouldn't really get in trouble with it in person. Because people saw where I was coming from, and I could make compelling arguments, but I didn't really, I wasn't somebody who was political in any way. I didn't really talk about politics, really think about politics very much. I didn't really touch on very controversial things because I just wasn't even really thinking that way. And as a journalist, I was somebody who I just like to report, loved interviewing people, getting their perspectives, didn't have to align with mine. Done all sorts of stories, like of, covered all types of people. I just find it interesting. But it was after my own kind of brush with cancellation
Mm.
that changed that caused me to actually become more outspoken. So it's interesting because I think I kind of went maybe a different way with it, and I think you're still early in that, so you might find that it changes how you interface in the future as you sort of processed it, because if at first
Yeah.
it's very dramatic.
I didn't expect it was because it happened. She wrote me after I made a joke on Twitter about white dudes for Harris. I was mocking them. I said white power. And what I meant was it's funny that, but it was a guy's retweet. It was Richard Hanania or whatever his name is, and he was already been called a racist. So the fact that they saw me retweeting him and he was mocking them and I mocked them and I said white power. And I was joking, obviously. Sarcasm,
Yeah.
hello, grew up in the 80s. Um, and by the end of the day, a really good friend of mine wrote me and said, "What did you mean by that white power tweet?" And I was like, "What? Whoa, oh, you think I'm a white supremacist?" And he's like, "No, no, I just wondered." But for a second, he thought about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the danger of the time we're living in right now, is that people jump to those conclusions right away, and their imagination does all the rest. And then another friend wrote to me and said, what's going on with that tweet? Like millions of people have seen it by now. And then that brought the attention of Rebecca Keegan, a journalist at the Hollywood Reporter, who I actually know and have known over the years. She's always been really nice. We've always said hi to each other at film festivals and stuff. I always thought, oh, she's a decent person. And I think she is. I don't think she's not I don't think she's a bad person.
Yeah.
And so she wrote me, "Oh, I'd like to do a story about you." And I was like, "Oh, you mean about a single mom who built a business and it lasted and became profitable for 25 years and a whole industry kind
Gonna
of
guess
grew
not
around
that one.
it?" No, not that. Oh, what could it be? And so it turned out, of course, she wanted to talk about politics because this is a great story. And we were heading into the election. It was summer. And I felt my stomach drop because I knew I'm not stupid. I knew what that meant. So right away, we had to go into damage control. My whole staff had to start their own site and leave because they couldn't be associated with me, so that their brand would, so they could make money. It
Mm-hmm.
happened so fast. And then when the story came out, Apple TV pulled their ads that day. And then every single studio except one, and then one or two studios ended up advertising. But I had to go to the Telluride Film Festival the next month in the end of August. The story came out in August. And that was really the most surreal experience of my life because I've been going for over 10 years. I knew everybody. I knew all the publicists. I hung out with these people. They were my friends. And it was a cold hand. It was no publicist writing me. I was taken off lists. I wasn't invited to parties. There's a thing called a patrons brunch that I felt very lucky to be invited to every year, which is up on the mountain and all the movie stars go to it. And, I was always really lucky to get that invite, and a lot of other people didn't get it, and that was taken. And my whole staff couldn't go to that. And I just felt fear, just
Mm-hmm.
fear that I've never felt before. I couldn't really describe it, to feel hunted and to feel hated and to think that people see you a certain way, even though to me I'm the same person, but to them I'm a Trump supporter, I'm a racist, I'm a bad person, and they all went along with it. All of them, almost. A couple people said hi and were nice, but it was chilling and weird and sad and scary. And then when I came back, the studios just silence, dead silence, And one studio did end up advertising, which I was so grateful for, one major studio. And I wrote them a thank you letter because it was like, without that, it really would have been just the absolute end. But I went from having a really reliable income wherein I support like so many members of my family who don't have money, to
Mm-hmm.
struggling, to back to being a struggling person with not a lot of money and, working hard to make ends meet. And so
Overnight, essentially.
almost overnight, and they disinvited me to the Oscars. I've been going to the Oscars for 10 years, and I wrote this annual report for Women's Media Center about the Oscars, and they They didn't want me to write it, about women and the Oscars. And a good friend of mine that I've known for almost 20 years, a really good friend, somebody that we texted all the time, and he would send me like a Valentine's card and birthday card, and we were good friends, and he worked on the site with me. That was it. He was done. He was not going to be my friend anymore. He was not going to. So I was in that world. I was completely and totally alone. Um, and it was wild to me because I couldn't make it make sense in my mind because I'm like, I'm the same person. And why are they saying? And I tried to put myself in their place. I tried to say, would I have felt if I saw someone act this way? Would I have treated them that way? Would I have done that to them? Would I have been somebody who was like in a Twilight Zone episode or like in the Arthur Miller's The Crucible? Like, would I be that weak minded to be that way? And I'm glad that I wouldn't be. I don't think I would be.
The funny
And
thing is, I had the exact same thought when like literally word for word, when things turned around for me in my thinking when I was being attacked. So
really,
it's yeah, like literally, I
what was the
smiled
thing
while you
that
were
got
saying.
you in trouble? What was the thing? What was it that?
Oh, mine was also kind of silly. So I ran it was a offshoot of a group for female journalists, but it was a bigger group, and mine was just a job board. So all it was is a job board, and
It was
we
on
just
Facebook or?
it was on Facebook,
Mm.
and it was even featured in the New York Times because I had a mentorship program, and it was just it was about 30,000 members of journalists. It still is actually. I still have the group, but what had happened was somebody posted a job opening at Fox News, and that person and it was very apologetic too. It's like, we're trying to diversify, change the climate, like she came in like that, and she just got attacked, because it's a white supremacist Nazi
Oof.
organization, I guess, that sort of type of thing. And since it was my group, I felt a responsibility to say something because I don't want people attacked. So I just said, I thought it was a kumbaya post. In retrospect, maybe it was, people always, as I start telling them what I said, they know the outcome. I didn't. I was very naive. So I said, listen, let's stay out of politics in this group and personal attacks. We've come apart so much over the years. Let's just come together and, very kumbaya. And people didn't think that. And so they turned to me. They started calling me, white supremacist, Nazi. I'm not even white. But
Oh, can you
it's like,
believe we've just lived through this? What a nightmare.
and they started like reaching out to editors so that I wouldn't be able to
Yeah,
work
yeah, that's what they
again,
do. They're
downvoting my
terrible.
content, attacking me on Twitter, like everywhere, trying to do little articles on me. And yeah, it kind of turned it around because I wrote a piece for Newsweek about what they were, which was bullies. But really, what turned, because I was like not used to
I hope
having.
you named names. I hope you named their names because the
I
worm will
didn't.
turn on all these terrible people. I
I didn't
promise.
name names, but I look at the time I was so stunned by this. I thought, if so many people are going against me, maybe I got something wrong. I genuinely was like, not sure, and I didn't think I had done anything wrong, but ultimately, that very same thing, that thought of like, hey, if I disagreed with myself, which fair enough, you can disagree with me, and the position I took later on too, but it's like, if you do, how would I, if I did, how would I express it? And so I've decided I don't respect any of those people who attacked me, threatened me, and so on. There were some people who sent me messages that were thoughtful arguments, and I actually took them into consideration. But those people don't deserve my care.
Mm.
And I that really turned it around for me because I saw them for who they were, which is bullies. And I also was getting so many messages of support from people who were saying, I see what's happening to you and it's wrong, but I feel so ashamed because I'm so scared to speak up.
No, exactly. That's the other
Yeah,
problem. That's the other problem. I
yeah.
get that
It's
too.
a
I
big
get
problem.
that so
Well,
much. I
because you
get those
get so
letters.
much association, right? Like if people are I mean, even us talking, right? Like, there is a connotation of endorsement of everything you think, and there isn't. But I also don't think, as I was hearing your story, I was like, there's no way in the world that you deserve that kind of outcome. I also don't think that should have even been a story. But even
Yeah.
though you and I mean, you like often prop up Tucker. I can't stand the guy. I think he's people have Trump derangement syndrome. I have Tucker derangement
Oh,
syndrome.
okay.
Same
Yeah.
letters, but based on facts. So we definitely disagree there. We disagree on Trump. We disagree on a great deal of things. But I can also see that you're a person who is A, being quite brave, B, isn't coming at it from a bad place. Even if I disagree with your conclusions, like I respect that you're not somebody I respect that you thought about them. I respect that I know that that doesn't make you some kind of a villain or a bigot or any of those things that people automatically label. And I think there's this terrible act of cowardice. I think that most people who stop talking to you didn't stop talking to you because they just disagree with you. They stopped talking to you because they are afraid and they're cowardly, and that is, I think, kind of the great disease of our time, and perhaps all
Yeah,
times.
that's such brilliantly said. I grew up on the left and I grew up watching movies, my heroes, you know, all the lessons I learned from the Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone, there's an episode I think it's called Number 13 Looks Just Like You or something. And it's about a society where everybody has to look exactly the same. They all have to pick a number in a
Mm.
catalog and everybody. And this one really smart, wonderful woman who looks very different from everybody else, loves her free mind, her open mind. She doesn't want to be that. And they pressure her and pressure her. And by the end, she's, I look just like you, and that. And then the monsters are due on Maple Street. It's like, and I'll wish you into the cornfield. These lessons I grew up with that I have internalized about what's right and what's wrong. It just seemed to have gone out the window. Like, what happened to the people that I used to admire? Where are they? They're standing on the side of witch hunters because of Trump, basically. Like he broke their
Mm.
brain. And it's hard for me to get back to a place where I was, because I used to be one of those people, but it's hard for me to get
Mm.
back to the place of remembering that, what it felt like. My only tiny tap back to that time was an ex-boyfriend of mine that I'd gone to the prom with was out of the bubble, and he was either a Trump guy or he was flirting with MAGA or he was posting memes or something. And I just remember how verboten it was that he was that, and it was this idea of poor guy. What happened to him? What went wrong? How did he get radicalized? And but I also feel like there's an element to you and me, people like us. You and me are like people who there's an element that we don't have a filter. You know what I mean? And we'll just say what we think. And that kind of person can't survive this era.
Mm.
Because everybody wants you to really to fall in line and to obey and to do what they tell you to do. And so you end up becoming like a witch in Salem. You're one of these people that would just be put in jail, you know?
I think for
And if you
me, I was very used to actually being, I worked in PR, so I know how to control myself. I can do it. I just at a certain
yeah.
point I chose not to because it felt wrong, and it felt like an abdication of duty. And I think, for me, I saw what was happening on the left, the hysteria, the inaccuracy. I'm very evidence based person. Like I like to look at facts and concrete information, right? So when people talk about truth seeking, it's this oh, whose truth is that? Well, I hate when people say that, because there is objective things, there is factual information that you can get. Now, might not always be able to get it, but there's a whole lot of it that you can. And so for me, certain things that that shifted my mindset is also seeing how things were misrepresented. Like, you take a clip, and then and it would be so out of context, you watch the whole thing and it's clearly something entirely different. And I think just having an objective, unemotional way of looking at things allowed me to see things really more clearly. And I didn't like on the left the level of intolerance, the exaggeration, the hysteria. And now I criticize the right more, and we talked about this before we started, but it's because I'm so exposed to it right now. So I used to be so exposed to the things on the left that I really thought were intolerant,
Mm,
anti-liberal, authoritarian, and then and now I'm seeing the same kind of things on the right, which I have a lot of disappointment in too, because I kind of felt like, in a way, like, hey, I stood up for people who were being unfairly targeted, and now those a lot of those same people are not opposed to targeting others on a different ideological side. But I think we tend to react more to our environment. So because I spend a lot of time on X, and for some reason my algorithm is like, I never see any left leaning content. So it's easier for me to get sort of enraged at the right.
mm,
But really, I'm enraged at, but where I was kind of going with that is, well, I get enraged at certain people. I get because of how they're cruel or unprincipled. I sometimes don't like, that they're not sticking to facts and they make up a lot or follow certain lines. But as
mm.
individuals, I think it's still important to look at, like, there's also lots of people within MAGA who I was like, they're clearly decent, good people. They just, hey, I don't agree with them on certain things or they support, but I can see where they're coming from. And it's not like this evil place. And unfortunately, we have a dynamic now where people on the left are sort of like, anybody who's MAGA is,
Yeah.
evil, blah blah, Nazi, and you see that also on the right, where on certain segments of the right, because I think the right is like 5, 6 different segments now,
Some of them are really, I think, really terrible people, honestly. And
right?
I'll tell them as much and get mad at them when I see that. Yeah. People are kind of the same, right? We're all not that different from each other. Give
No,
somebody a
not
little
that
bit of
different.
power. People get put them, we build tribes, we fight wars, that's our nature. And if you have power, like I do not doubt for 1 second that if the right had as much, in fact, we know that they did, because in the 1940s and 50s, that's when the blacklists happened. They did
That's
exactly
right.
the same thing that the left is doing now. It's just they don't have the institutional power now. They
That's
might
correct.
someday, but the Republicans had it during the blacklists, and they forced Hollywood to comply, and Hollywood went along with it, and all those people went. Of course, the worm turned, as it always
Mm-hmm.
does. But I mean, I don't think personally that there's such a thing as good and bad people. I think we're all sort of built similar ways. What I will say is there are people who are conformists and people who are, as you say, cowards, and
Mm-hmm.
that is an individual thing. That's not a party thing. That's
I
a
think
friend of
most of
mine
the
always says it
behavior. No, I
comes
think
easy.
most of the
Cowardice comes
behavior,
easy. Yeah.
cowardice comes
Sorry.
in. Yeah, no, sorry, I interrupted you, but
It's all
no,
right.
I do think that people are, um, yeah, I think there's also like principled people and not principled people. So I think it's a good point that some people are non-compliant, and I think those are very important people, and most people will go along to get along. But I think, I mean, the reason that I tend to not talk about all of this in political terms, like I try not to just make it
Mm,
right or left, is because I just see the same patterns of behavior on both sides. I even stopped, like I did use the word woke earlier on, in the new sense of the word, and I've stopped doing that because I think it's more helpful to identify the exact behavior, rather than use this like broad terminology, because
mm,
that exact behavior, okay, sensorial, intolerant, oppressive, judgmental, like like those are really the issues. Inconsistent virtue signaling, like those are the things that people have an issue with when they talk about woke. But when we use just that broad term, like A, people don't know what you're talking about, and B, it's like as if it's only something that exists on one side of the aisle when it doesn't. And also it makes people just sort of defensive automatically, because it's like, well, oh, you're calling people like me woke, right? They're not going to self-reflect or change. So
Right. It stops. That's the problem with some words. There are words. That's why I don't do the pronouns thing. Like I don't say a trans man is, a he or whatever. I'll use the
mhm,
preferred pronouns if people to refer, because as soon as you say the pronoun the wrong way or how they don't want you to say it, right or wrong, that you can decide that.
mhm,
But it stops the conversation and turns into an argument about that. And it's like, that's not the point. I want to get past that to another point. I'm not
yeah.
arguing the pronoun. I think this arguing over words thing is kind of a waste of time in a way. Like we don't you can't mandate language and you can't make people say things and believe them just by forcing them to, like, confess as a witch. You can't do that. You can't compel speech. Um, but I agree with you that I see it on both sides too. I felt like the left was worse only because they had more power, more
I think it's
institutional
because they have
power.
institutional power, and I think the other part of it is because you were on the left. That was
Yeah.
your environment, so I think you were seeing it much more strongly there. Like I had no awareness of anything on the right until a few years ago, because that just wasn't my
Me
environment.
too. I know, same. Yeah.
When I started talking to people on the right, I was like, oh, they're not all racist, and
No,
like,
exactly. It's so shocking, right? I my first foray into that was the Never Trumpers, because I was a Hillary person, or no, I was a
mm,
Joe Biden supporter, and I
mhm.
was like, we got to win this election. I go back and I've left all my hideous writings of from those days on Medium, and I was so into this idea that Joe Biden had to win, and and so I was following like Rick Wilson and Joe Walsh and all these like uh, Charlie Sykes and these guys, Steve Schmidt, and they seem like really nice guys to me. And these are people that I've been told were horrible, bigot, racist, and I was like, well, if it's not true about them, you know, how can it be true about? And so my adventure into MAGA world was to answer that question, you know, because to tell you the truth, and I know you'll understand this, you're one of the few people that will. I felt a chill go down my spine at some point in 2020 that I was part of a group dehumanizing a whole other group. And I know that that's wrong from history. And I didn't want to be part of it. And I knew it was going to be hard to not be part of it, but I had to know, is it true? Are they really like that? Is Trump really like that? What's the situation? Why do so many people support him? And so I just started watching his rallies and getting to know all of his supporters. And I can tell you something, the kindest people that I've ever known in my life are MAGA people. I'm not saying MAGA people are better. I'm saying that the kindest people I've ever known are come from this group of
You know
people.
what's interesting? Because I went and I read through your comments and one of the pieces that you wrote, and I think you might be attracting the better kind, because I thought the comments were pretty decent people, and writing in a respectful way, including people who might have disagreed with something. I didn't see any like hateful, stupid, kind of stuff going on there. I can't say that I think that MAGA are the best, but I'm not even going to compare them to another group. Like, I
Yeah.
just try to look at people in general. I just look at people individually. So I might not like a whole bunch of MAGA people, but I also really like certain people, and I think they're good and decent. So I try not to hold it against them by default, and I try to approach it also with curiosity, like, why does this person, this was my, when I started encountering conservatives in general, even before all of this stuff, like, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Like somebody that I wasn't so exposed to this. So I was curious to understand who they are, how they talk, what they think, what they believe. And so I didn't have a lot of judgment necessarily. I knew that there were certain things that we disagree on, but I didn't really have judgment of them. I was more just interested. And I think there is this tendency to just like immediately judge people by the category that we put them in.
Ah, yeah. And if you're not in that, like you're telling me about this, and I'm thinking, she's so right about the individual. And the thing that I found is that a lot of people who find their way to MAGA or MAHA or whatever it is, they're people who are nonconformists, who are not part of this group, this dominant group, the in group, they say. There's the in
Mm,
group and there's the out group. MAGA is the out group. So I feel more comfortable. In high school, I was friends with all the misfits in the drama club. Like I hung out with all the people who were society rejects, and we formed
that
a
would be
very
me.
nice yeah, no, we would have been friends in high school because I wasn't part of the like the popular clique or whatever,
We would have
but
been
I like
friends if
that.
you were like if you were willing to be friends with me. I was like definitely the
I
awkward,
was a friend of the friendless. That was what people knew me as in high school. And I
right?
liked that. And I found that I'm gravitating towards those kind of people now. Do I agree with them on everything? No, I don't. And they know that, right? Like I'm pretty honest. I haven't ever said that I'm a Christian, right? Despite the fact that
Mm-hmm.
they would love me to be one.
Yes.
I can't lie about that. But there's such a fine line between, and we've talked about this before, between being really really honest and serving an audience. If you know you have an audience, you know what they want, you want to
Mm-hmm.
give them what they want because you don't want to disappoint them, especially if they're paying subscribers.
It's a
But at
big
the same
issue.
time, it's a big issue. That's They call it audience capture, whatever it is, and
They
it's
do,
it's really
yeah.
hard. It's hard for everybody. It's hard for you as a person online with your following. It's very hard for you. You can't please everybody. It's hard for the free press. It's hard for anybody who is trying to be honest.
It's hard for my mental health lately because I was more critical of certain things on the left for a while, and the woke stuff. I definitely built an audience that's quite mixed, actually, but also there's certainly a lot of people on the right. And so when I started criticizing, you know, people on the right or their kings, um, I get so much hate, like, and it's pretty bad. Like it's as direct as, shut up, you B, or C. Nobody likes you. Like I just get stuff like that all the
I don't
time. I
like
get
that.
death threats. It's like it's a lot, and it does make me kind of think worse of people, which I hate because I'm still trying to be like grounded and like, okay, we judge individuals, but sometimes it gets me down, and sometimes it makes me not want to say things because I just know I'm just gonna get a bunch of hate. But at the same time, you're right. At this point I probably can't control myself that well, um, in
Well,
terms
you
of
could you
like
could
Tourette's.
try not reading the you could try not reading
I now read a
you
lot
know,
less of the
the
comments than I
yeah.
used to. I don't want to completely, and I know a lot of people shut themselves off from comments, and I really didn't want to do that because I don't want I want it's okay for people to challenge me, and I want to hear their whether they agree or don't agree. I kind of want to understand where they're coming from, and maybe they have compelling arguments that might change my mind. So I don't want to
Mm,
isolate myself from that or that feedback loop. And but balancing that is hard because
very.
you don't always get the comments that are just useful feedback. You get so much
No.
trash.
If you go up against, I forget what it was that I got swarmed by the right. I almost had to lock my account down. I forget what it was that I said that made them so mad. Um, I do allow for this idea that we are going through something that humans haven't ever. We are more people online than ever connected than ever before, at a time when there are more people alive than ever before. And we have
Hmm.
these algorithms, and we're trying to adapt to this thing, and it's really bad. Like I know when I get online, when I get on Twitter, a different personality takes over. It's a different voice that I have, and it's maybe the id. It's impulsive, it's reactionary, it's easily triggered. And I get off and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm just a normal person again.
There's
And
a
I'm sure
trigger
that's true
mechanism
with
to it.
all the people on MAGA who scream at you. You know what I mean? I'm sure they're getting affected just the same way.
Yeah, and there's truth to that. I mean, I think that social media has not necessarily been potentially net, it has positives for sure, but there's been a lot of negatives to it, and
Mm,
I think it's made discourse. I mean, it encourages people to have an opinion immediately on everything, and not process things, not think through, not, and this is not even going into the amount of false information that's traveling. The things that get amplified aren't, the sunshine is best disinfectant thing is not always true. In fact, it's rarely true in the social media ecosystem. And I think that in particular, that a thing where you have to have an opinion on things, and especially if your account sort of grows to any kind of prominence or you have an audience, there is like, if I want to write a post that's just like introspective and philosophical, like that's not going to go over very well. And the posts that will do really well, like I know exactly the kinds of posts I need to put in order to get a lot of attention.
yeah.
And is there a temptation? Certainly, but that's why you have to be sort of disciplined and be like, no, I'm not going to play into that. I'm going to take a beat. And if I don't have an opinion on this, I don't have to comment. And hey, I need to verify this information before I get outraged, because there's this rush to be first and to comment right away. And in that
Yeah.
process, it's like people, two things happen. One is people don't take the time to look up information. But I also think on some level they don't want to, because then maybe they don't have to get to experience the same outrage, and they don't get to be part of this in group that's experiencing that same
Exactly.
outrage.
That's what it is. It's all of us looking for common ground, for agreement, for a tribe. And it's like this weird soup, this civilization soup where everybody's trying to find their messiah, their leader, their north star, and they can't because every day it's a new thing. Change the channel, more opinions. Oh wait, I know I don't disagree. I disagree with that post. That person can't be my messiah. I need a new one, a different one.
Yeah.
And we're trying to, like, humans by nature, we want everybody to agree on things, right? We want to agree on everything. That's how we storytelling. It's important in our species because we all believe the same story. We're all sharing. That's why movies are so important in movie theaters, so that we can all be in the same place, as opposed to streaming where everybody's in their little bubbles. And if you take that away, where are we going to have? We need an arena.
And we
We've
don't
always
have
had
that.
that.
So all of those things have been
Twitter,
destroyed.
right? Yeah, Twitter's the
Yeah,
only
but
thing.
But it was different because, okay, so you mentioned movies, so people, there'd be big releases and everybody would be really excited, and it would be a very uniting sort of thing. So people went to see Star Wars or the Titanic or something like that. Those were these huge movies. Also culturally, like all the stuff that Weinstein Company made. They're not a great guy, but the movies were quite good. And those were like more kind of Oscar medium budget kind of movies that really had a cultural resonance for people in a very personal way, and you could sort of bond over those. And then in terms of media consumptions, it's like, okay, you'd read a paper and you'd read it cover to cover, and most people read the same paper, so you had a shared understanding of what's happening in the world.
That's
Now you
right.
have this opportunity to have an extended, because you have a lot of places to go and you can read whatever you want, but part of that is also you only read the things you want to read, and not
And
just
that's
in
the
terms of
bad part.
ideology.
Yeah.
It is the
Right.
bad part. And it's not just
Yeah.
ideology, but also depth. Because if you read a paper or magazine cover to cover, you get a lot of different kinds of stories. But now it's like, well, you're going to only click maybe on political stuff. And that's your whole world is politics. It's not everything else. It's like there's a richer world. There's technology and culture and scientific discoveries
Yeah.
being made. So now we have this hyper focused we're hyper focused on politics in particular from a lot of people, and only reading this stuff that they already align with.
It's a drama that people are following, this politics story, because we don't have stories anymore. We don't have good stories because Hollywood
Mm.
has collapsed. And that's what we need. We need Top Gun Mavericks. We need movies where we're all watching them and we're all that's our story. But our story now is this cosplaying, LARPing that they're the resistance and they're fighting the axis of evil and whatever else it is. But like the thing that bothers me is when I go on TikTok, TikTok is like Twitter in that Twitter X took the algorithm from TikTok. He's using that same algorithm, which is you just get more of what you interact with.
Yeah.
Um, where it didn't used to be like that on Twitter. I've been on there
I
since
have no
2007.
in TikTok I have like the most nice content. Like I just have
Yeah,
like magic and dancing and
it's
like
so good. It's
comedy.
so good. Same, and you get that if that's what you look for, and if you
Yeah.
dare to actually click, like I got into a horrible pocket of dog abuse videos, and I was oh no,
Oh,
and then
that's
like,
horrible.
but I hate how I'll get a clip from CBS or ABC News, and it's always from one perspective. It's always from the left. It's always look at these bad Republicans, and I just think that's so frustrating. Like, why can't there just be news that's news? Why does it have to be from a point of view? That didn't used to be like that, or maybe it did. We just didn't notice it.
That's what drove me crazy too with my because at first I started talking about journalism and how it was ruined, and that wasn't a political perspective for me at all. It was just I was just seeing the inaccuracies, the sensation. Like I as a reader just wanted to know what's going on, right?
Yeah,
And I wasn't being told what's actually going on. Everything had this spin on it, and it was factually often inaccurate. There was no kind of responsibility, and part of that isn't even just obviously one aspect to it is the activist journalist situation, but that's not the only thing. I mean, I think the financial structures, the internet has just shifted a lot about it, and so quality stories weren't being told. There wasn't a mentorship situation for younger journalists. When I started out in journalism, I had editors who were kind of veteran editors, made my writing better. They challenged me. Their editing was usually like, they didn't just edit it, they would ask me questions that allowed me to edit the article to make it better. And they wouldn't
yeah,
let me get away with generic statements or vague statements or things that weren't factually verifiable. And so that
yeah,
taught me to be diligent in that. And I don't think that's happening anymore. And there's also no fact checkers anymore. And people get really allergic when
no,
you bring up fact checkers, but like
yeah,
fact checkers were about verifying like that you literally what you wrote is accurate. There's no spin to it. It's just like, hey, I said that this happened on this date, and I remember how mortified I was. I made a mistake in an article. I gave somebody credit for something that he would have been a child when
oh
that happened.
no,
And he wrote me, and the magazine printed a retraction in the next issue. It was so horrifying and embarrassing, but I remembered
Mm.
that. I'm like, that's not happening
It
ever again.
happens. Yeah, yeah. I mean, mistakes like that, but I don't know when it happened that it changed. When did it change? Was it Trump? Did he just
I
break the
mean,
media?
I do think Trump had an incredible impact. I think it was happening before Trump. I think it was already there. But Trump, I think it's like the media saw their responsibility to fight him, and I think people are genuinely irrational. Like cuz I used to think that people lie about things, but in a lot of cases they're not even lying. They really believe it. I mean, even
Yeah,
the Elon Musk, oh my god, I almost just did it, which the salute situation. It was interesting because at first I didn't think anyone thought that's what it was, and then I
yeah.
realized that a lot of people genuinely think that's what it was, which is why they're outraged. Like
Oh,
it's
they
not, they're
absolutely
not
do, and
cosplaying.
so many people on TikTok thought that too, and it's weird because your mind can Your mind can I remember I saw that with the Me Too movement. Like, people could put an image in their mind and they believed it. If they could see it in their mind's eye, they could believe it. That's why they were able to hang 20 people in Salem,
Hmm.
because they were convinced that people that they knew, that they grew up with, that they lived down the street, that they were possessed by witchcraft, and because they wouldn't confess, they hanged them, which is amazing to me still that went on. But it's helped me understand what's happening now, because people, there's a part of us that just needs to believe the story, you know, that he's a Nazi.
It's a combination of wanting to believe the story, and then a combination of like how you view the and what access to different facts you have and what lens you view them through. Because I'll look at him and I'm like, this is not a guy who like hates Jews. This is a guy who like definitely makes a lot of mistakes. He's very immature at times. He was very enthusiastic in that moment and physically extravagant. But the only reason I see him actually intentionally doing that gesture is knowing his kind of persona and everything around him is like, oh, maybe he would troll. That would be like the one reason I would kind of see for actually legitimately doing it, which not a great thing. But the way that other people look at it, they're like, well, this is a guy from apartheid South Africa. His dad and the whole mining thing, which isn't even true, and gets repeated constantly. And then the fact that he amplifies certain people on the platform, and then the German party endorsement situation, like, so they'll take those set of facts, and to them, that's the lens that they're going to see it through. Their facts aren't even wrong, but they are limited, and they only see those particular things. Well, some of those facts are wrong, but they're also just limited. Versus if you look at it from I think a much broader perspective, where you're like, okay, but this and this, and look how he behaves in this situation, it just doesn't make logical sense.
No, it
But
doesn't,
but
because especially if you know a lot about Hitler, as I do.
mhm.
Look, Nazis and dictators and stuff, they don't mess around. They don't try to, like, if Elon Musk was a Nazi, like, Twitter wouldn't exist. I mean, it would be completely authoritarian. Everybody would be banned. People would be shot. Journalists would be put in jail.
But
Like,
did you hear
fascists,
the
they
here?
don't
Did you
mess
hear that?
around, man.
Did you hear the thing where there was a claim, I forgot what show that was, where it's like it's because of free speech that Hitler was able to do
Yeah.
what he did. And I thought about this and I'm like, well, there's a degree of truth. With free speech, he was able to rile up a group of people who, hated Jews and and all that kind of stuff. But he took away free speech in order to actually exact
Implement
his
that,
actions.
that's
Yeah.
yeah, because he learned it from Mussolini, who was like, he's a fascist, and I'm just going to shut down the newspapers and no more elections, and I'm a fascist, and you have to do everything I say. That they make no bones about it. There's no arguing with a fascist, right? That's what's so funny about this, is if these people have no idea what fascists are really like. But the thing about Hitler was, Hitler had the radio, just like FDR had the radio, and that enabled his speech to travel, and his speech invigorated people. And I see a lot of the left in Hitler's speeches, and I see some of the right. Nationalism is something that can become Nazism. The pro-German, Hitler was the one true leader to bring Germany back. And but I can tell you this, because my father's Jewish, and my grandmother couldn't get a job in the 30s in America because of her last name. She had to change her last name to get a job. So the anti-Semitism wasn't just in Germany, it was here too. And so people knew what Hitler was up to. He wrote it in a book in prison, Mein
Well,
Kampf.
he took some of the segregation ideas from the United States,
That's
and
right, he
here
sure did, because of
in
the
Canada,
communists.
Yeah, in Canada until not that long ago. Well, I don't remember which year. It's now a while, but it was not as long ago as people like to think. They had parks where they said it's for blacks and Jews not allowed, right? And it was explicit. So, there was a lot of complacency and all this kind of stuff in other countries as well.
That's yeah, that's why communism came here. Communism was, the people like Oppenheimer, they were liberating the black community, right? They were
Hmm.
the communists were why the 7 men who were falsely accused of rape in the South, they defended them and got them out. Scottsboro 7 or something, I can't remember the name of it, but and so the fight between communism and fascism that was brewing in the 30s, all that stuff so fascinating to me. But you can see where the worm turned because communism then became the threat in America. And with it, the civil rights movement went down too, because it was tied to communism. But Hitler, what I'm saying is, yes, he had free speech, but the Germans want to sit around and pretend that they would have shut down his speech if he was complaining about the Jews. They wouldn't have. They wouldn't have even done that here in the U.S. So that's the
It
thing.
was
It's like,
accepted speech. The discrimination was accepted, and I think the whole argument between is like, was Hitler like right wing or left wing is kind of misguided. And I had engaged with it mistakenly. And by the way, Elon, who's now like, well, it's left wing. Well, he in a tweet he responded to me, said, well, and this stuff was left wing and this stuff was right wing, and that was a much more nuanced response. And I'm sad that he moved away from that. But it isn't, it took elements of the left, it took elements of the right, and it shows you how it's not an ideological thing in terms of like left or right. It's ultimately it's about authoritarianism, taking away people's rights, degrading individuals, taking away individuality. I mean, all of like the Nazi philosophy, if you want to call it that, was about the nationalism aspect of it. It's like people had to adhere to this. You had these Nazi youth groups, and they had to look a certain way, and so it's about taking away, chipping away at the individual on a level, and then enforcing, and taking away human rights, individual rights, which include
yeah,
speech.
that's what drove me nuts about these idiots on the left. I'm sorry to say it, but like, it makes me so angry that people haven't done their World War II research because you can't just come out and say, Trump is a Nazi, MAGA is a Nazi movement without understanding the fundamentals of Nazism. Nazism is not freedom. Nazism is the opposite of freedom. It's all power to the state. It's what the left had before when Biden was in power. It's having the government in control of everything and censoring what people think and what they can say. The military wasn't involved, although it kind of was. But fascism is conform or else, and it's all power to the state.
And
That's
unfortunately, what I'm
fascism.
seeing now in the right, which has been my disappointment, is the very people who spoke up for free speech and freedom, which I respected and aligned with, are a lot of those people are inconsistent because now it's like, okay, well, we're going to ban these okay, ban, people jump at me for saying ban, take out of school libraries books. And people will often say, well, these are just like hypersexual content, which fair enough, there is that. But there's also books that I specifically, because I looked into it and I was like, okay, well, some of these books don't make any sense. There were books that were just science fiction works, or even things like one of the examples would be Anti-Racist Baby or something like that, which is, you might not like, we don't have to like that book or agree with it and think it's maybe ideologically BS, but regardless, it's okay for someone to choose to read it. And I just find there's a lot of inconsistency, and then there is like some people are like, well, you can't use this language, like if somebody wants to use pronoun, like to me it's about the freedom to choose and not have your language compelled in any way. And if somebody wants to use a pronoun or whatever, they have the right to do that. They just don't have the right to force it on somebody else.
Yeah.
And similarly, you can't restrict somebody's right to not use it.
Yeah, I agree with that, except for the fact that in 2012, this madness got into schools. And I know because it was in my daughter's school. I raised her in the
Yeah.
progressive public schools in Los Angeles. And the first time she was depressed in her life was when she was taking an anti-racist, quote unquote, critical race theory class. And I told her straight up, I thought it was a cult and I laughed about it. And it helped her to see it a little critically, but not her classmates. So in my mind, when the quote unquote book banning is what Hitler did, period. That's what fascists do. Book taking books out of school libraries means the government isn't behind this ideology. And to me, I think that's it's not censorship so much as it's taking religion out of schools. Now, if they want to let Christians put their books in there, fine. Then let them put all religions in there because the
I
woke
think the
thing is
way
a religion. And if
I
you're
think the
okay with that, and I grew up saying no Christianity in schools, no prayer in schools. Well, if they're going to put that woke shit in there, then the Christians get to put their books in there too.
I don't think it should be in their curriculum, but I think the school library is a little bit different thing. And I think there's never going to be like a full consensus on which books should be selected or not. So I would say that there should be some kind of a process that strives to at least represent a diversity of viewpoints. And that means having like maybe a panel that decides, and that panel isn't made up of just one type of
Yeah.
person. And if people want to vote for the Bible to be in the school library, then that's fine. I don't see an issue with the. I don't think it should be taught just the way I don't think anti-racist baby or whatever should be taught. But I think that having it in the library, because there are people like I read Mark Twain books and people think they're racist now, right? And I
That's
learned a
right.
lot.
They
uh,
thought To Kill a Mockingbird was racist.
to Kill a Mockingbird.
That got banned from a school in Burbank, but they took it out because it was offensive, and we were against that. And but the problem I have with the left and the woke stuff isn't so much in older kids high school. Like high school, not the gender stuff, not the sexuality stuff, keep it out. But the anti-racist stuff, anything like that that's about race, it's about that to me is fine to put in a high school, but not in a lower. Like what they were doing was indoctrinating kids, and that to me I'm against
I'll
indoctrination.
agree with you on the elementary schools because I don't think at that point it's at a point where somebody is capable of really critically analyzing text for themselves necessarily. I think high school is a different situation. I mean, if you got a kid who's actually taking books out of the library, you're already steps ahead, voluntarily.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. You have a kid that wants to read, great. Plus they're
so I
so
think like we can
curious.
trust that kid. Yeah.
I mean, it's funny that they care so much about the libraries and books, like you say. Like, first of all, they're more likely to encounter this stuff in movies and on TikTok and in movie music videos and at award shows. Like it's saturated into our culture. I'm but I see why they're getting involved because when the government's behind it, that's a whole different thing. Now, where they started to go with it in my daughter's school, I think caused real harm to the girls, especially that felt like they had to become boys to feel like they could be worthwhile and valued and loved and protected. And that weirded me out. And it still does, honestly. Like to say that it's okay to teach people that they can decide their gender as children. You can't have that in schools. No, you want to teach it at home.
Yeah, I think it's a complicated thing because what I noticed at first, like I think there were very legitimate grievances about this stuff that people were expressing that sort of devolved into really hateful rhetoric, like genuinely so, where
I
people are
agree with
just
that, yeah.
insulting. Yeah, but in terms of, but I also think there is like a denial of because I can see so the more trans kind of point of view is that children they're going through this really difficult thing and it would make their lives easier to transition, and so they're really trying to protect protect from their perspective the trans child, but from the perspective, but there is a denial almost of the so many cases of people who are kind of feel pressured or have some kind of a, because of the social aspects of it, think that they identify as trans and are not actually trans. And
Yeah.
I've read just so many cases of that I don't know how to quantify it. So I don't know because both sides are sort of competing for, they're not going to represent things accurately. And so it's hard for me to
Mm.
know, okay, how many cases are there of this kind of genuine gender dysphoria versus, the kind of cases where that's not actually the case, something else is going on, whether it's autism or depression, social pressure, or whatever,
Or they're just gay.
or they're just gay, which is the other category,
Yeah.
which is common because I have taken the time to read a lot of stories about this from parents and also the kids. So, like, clearly there is a significant portion, and so you either protect one or you protect the other is kind of the situation we end up in. And
Yeah. It's easy call for me because children can't consent. They can't
yeah,
consent to having their bodies changed
well, the
forever for the
counter
rest of their
argument
life.
to that, and by the way, it's not necessarily what I believe, but I think a strong counter argument to that would be, well, because this is kind of a medical situation and
It's
we
not.
make medical choices for kids.
It's not medical, it's psychological. And so and we treat psychology. We don't operate and sterilize children. We don't remove breasts of healthy young girls just because they're flipping out and they're caught up in some contagion. I see this guy on TikTok, a trans boy, and every day is a video about him being trans and how free he feels and how it's this euphoric thing. And, what else are you? What else are
Mm,
you, young man? How are you going to live your life like this for the rest of your life? You're just going to be singing songs about being trans? Like that's your whole identity. What else are you? Are you, going to sing about other things? Like what kids want is that. They want that identity. They want to be accepted. They want attention. And until we deal with that, until we deal with social media and how it's affecting these kids, look, you read Abigail Schreier's book and you can track it. The girls, this trans thing didn't hit girls until like 2012, 2013. I went and I did a search at the New York Times archives to find out when
mm,
trans children was even mentioned in their paper.
mm,
And it doesn't even start until like 2013.
mm.
Now,
That,
you'd think that there would be one article about a quote unquote trans child before that one, and there wasn't. And then it was an abundance of them. And it turned into a religion for the left.
you're right that it's something that became so kind of infectious in the public discourse where it's like very there is a pressure there because you can be special and so on.
And mothers
I
can be special, mothers can
Yeah.
be, they can not just be these boring old, white women that everybody hates. They can now be the mother of a trans child. And it's like this
Well, yeah.
you're a higher being.
It's I think those cases are it's interesting because like in other countries where it's not so politicized, they have trans children, and but those they take that very cautiously compared to what's happening here. There isn't this like super affirmative way of dealing with it. I don't know, and this is like such a wide topic. I don't know how to. I care about those people who are struggling with this, and it seems like the toolkit of psychology hasn't been able to address what's happening to them. And so I can understand why somebody might want to. It's just, we, there's just so many factors that are outside of just like figuring out what the best thing for that person is that I think are influencing. And it's so difficult to talk about it. It was a topic that I wouldn't touch for quite a long
Well, I'll
time.
tell you something. I raised my daughter in progressive elementary schools in Los Angeles around the exact kind of mothers who would now be mothers of trans kids. So I sent her to kindergarten, to preschool, um, elementary school in the Hollywood Hills to a middle school in Los Angeles, there was no trans kids. They didn't exist. These are the kind of people that send their kids to therapy, put them on drugs. They're depressed, they're bipolar. It started out with that. They're ADHD, they're this and that. They were all in their heads about
Mm.
psychology to be these perfect kids. And if a boy was gay and he wore a dress, everybody was like, isn't that great? He's wearing a dress. If a girl wore pants, fine, she's gay. She's wearing great. We love it. We're supporting you. Not one of these was a trans kid. Not one
Although I
until
will say one thing about that is that
2014, 2013,
okay,
2014 is when they started showing up
it's
because of Tumblr.
fair, but also I will say that even when I went to high school, like just being gay was like something that was not accepted and kids were
Oh,
bullied
I
and
know.
mocked.
Totally. Absolutely. Now, I don't go along with the bullying and mocking. I have a lot of trans friends actually, and my daughter's friends are trans. And
Mm.
but when she graduated high school, only one of her friends was obviously a gay woman who she told me, she's like, oh yeah, she's going to get top surgery, and now her name is, and she say the boy's name. By the time she got to college and she graduated college and she moved into, I think I wrote about this, I don't know if you read it, but in her apartment after college, the boy she had a crush on had fully transitioned to a female. The two people that she was roommates with had transitioned to the opposite sex and were dating. And this was like five people in this little apartment. And so that told me that there was something more going on than just they were born like that. How could this guy who was in a relationship all through college with this
Mm.
girl that she knew suddenly decide he wants to be? And so, but I don't want to get on the side of telling adults what to do or not using pronouns. As long as they're not making women feel uncomfortable in bathrooms and in locker rooms and on the sports and they can compete, then I don't care. Live your life how you want. If you want to live your life as a woman, I'll refer to you as a she. I follow so many of these trans people on TikTok, and they're wonderful, lovely people. I would never want to hurt them. They're not hurting anybody. It's the kids for me. It's the kids. I draw the line there. That's why I'm
And there's a
fighting.
lot of people who do feel that way about kids who are very much on the left. It's just that it's such a taboo topic, and it's probably one of the topics that had the most hostility towards it, which I think is part of why you have this like rarely hostile, aggressive reaction, counter reaction now. But I just don't think
I
that it
agree, but
justifies it. Yeah,
and it's not
yeah.
helpful because you're
No,
all you're
it's not.
doing is making them feel like you don't have a point, that you're a bad person. Um, but it is something really scary to me when I look at these detransitioners videos. That's what changed my mind because I was all on board with it when my daughter would talk about it. I wanted to be supportive. I wanted to be. I didn't want to hurt vulnerable people. But when I saw the detransitioners and I saw a woman having to raise her baby without her breasts, and these horrible doctors and teachers put her in this situation. No, this young man, I saw a video with him. They talked him into being a girl. They cut his balls off. And now he has to live the rest of his life as a eunuch, right? So if it doesn't go right for you, if you wake up and you're a 35-year-old man and you're balding and you're not attractive anymore, and you're not this cute little boy that's the girl that became a boy, and now you're just a grown man and you look like a middle-aged man and you don't even have a penis that works. All these kids are going to grow up and have to deal with that. And they're going to be looking at all of us and they're going to say, where were you? Why didn't you protect me? Why didn't you stop this? This is like lobotomies. It's like, sorry, I'm just going
No,
off.
it's okay. No, but this is something where it's like there's such a friction between I think like what the child wants and thinks they want at the moment, and
Mm.
the role of the adult, which is to, on the one hand, you want to support your child, but on the other hand, you have to protect your child. So parents also say no to things all the time, right? And
You
it's
don't cut off their balls and their breasts and sterilize them. It's just simple. How
Yeah, I
hard
mean,
can
I
that
don't.
be?
To be fair, I don't think that happens. I mean, it's mostly puberty blockers that are,
Yeah, they
which
they they
also
get
have
on a track.
consequences. Yeah.
Yeah, once they
It's
get
a
set,
track.
once they are affirmed as children, there's a lot of women out there, these incredible activists who are on the front lines fighting this, like Erin Friday, who you should have on your show. They say that once they get affirmed, then they're on a track, and that track leads to sterilization. And they say it.
Mm,
They say it in the disclaimer at the clinic. This, save your eggs, jerk off in a
mm,
jar and put it on the shelf because if you want to have kids, you're not going to be able to. And you can't
mm,
tell a 15-year-old to make that decision. You can't say to a 15-year-old, yeah, is this okay with you that you can't father children for the rest of your life? For the rest of your life? No, there is no excuse for it. The only thing I would buy, the only thing is if there's something in the water, like Alex Jones said, that really is changing people's sex. Like if it's really that, but I don't think so because of,
There's just literally no evidence for that. So I'm going to
but if
say,
there was, that would be the only thing where I would say, okay, well, maybe there is something going on. But even
yeah.
then, I would say we have to find a way to allow them to
The
live with their body intact.
I think the reason that I have like a little bit more of a difficult time with being that categorical about it is just because I know of cases where I know how hard, like if you transition after puberty, that transition doesn't tend to look that great.
I
And
know.
and the transition, and I've seen people who've transitioned when they're young are very well adjusted and happy and have relationships. So it does happen. It's just that the risk is very
It
high.
depends on how far you go. Like if you don't touch your reproductive organs and your quote
Mm.
unquote bottom surgery, then you
Which
can
they don't
kind of
need to
be
do.
okay. But
Yeah,
they
which they
do.
don't
And
really.
they
No,
they
I'm just saying
sterilize them.
they don't need to
Yeah.
do that necessarily like until they're old,
And I
significantly old.
absolutely understand that that's what's going on here. It's adults imposing their fantasies on children to say that, I'm trans and I wish I had been doing it when I was a kid so that I'd look like a real woman. But it's not fair. It's not fair to
It's
do
such
that
a
to
weird
people.
I feel like there's this weird trend in general of like when I went to high school, everybody wanted to conform and be the same, right? And then it feels like now everyone wants to be like special and different. And it's just it seems like a lot of this stuff is coming, and not just the trans, there's just generally like there's just a lot of that going around, and it's is it be I wonder if it's like partially because of like social media and how it encourages that and how everyone wants to be sort of special and it's more accessible, right? Because to be special in the past you'd have to do something like you'd have to be, I don't know, at least good in acting or something if you were going to be an actor,
Right, right.
and or be a talented writer or study and become an astronaut. I don't know, but like the bar is much higher, was much higher and to achieve something that makes you special. And now it's like, well, you can just do
Yeah.
fun, like videos and
Because everybody
put on
has their own,
makeup.
yeah, they have their own platform and it messes with your head. Everybody wants to be their own show, right? They want to be their own, they would want, and you start to get, right? No, you start to
Ta-da!
get likes and stuff. Yeah. And it messes with your head and you want more of it. And when it takes away, it feels bad. Um, and you get love bombed. A lot of the trans kids get love bombed, and that's a hard thing to deal with too. Everybody gets love bombed, you
But
know?
it's any kind of special, like anything that makes it a bit different, a bit of something that's like in particular things that might have gotten you bullied for in the past or were seen as
Yes,
like
yes.
negatives. It's like now it's like, wow, it's not all bad. I mean, for example, if you're like deaf, and you make videos about being deaf, like it's like sort of celebrated, whereas maybe wouldn't have
Yeah,
been that accepted in the past. But at the
exactly.
same time there is this like both positives and negatives to it, I think. See,
It's a
this is me
thing where
always
you
looking for the balance.
No, no, it's good. It's true though, but it's like, it's a thing where it's like, I watch these influencers and every single one of them, these beautiful women, they'll always have, not every single one, but most of them they'll always have like one little thing wrong with them. Like that's my OCD
Mm.
or that's my I have to take my psych
It's like you
meds or I have
have to.
to
You can't be this perfect. Yeah, you have to have either this or a disability or like I mean, I don't know, let's say skin
something you're
condition, like,
struggling with, like,
which is
and
like, hey, yeah.
it gives
And
you protection so people don't hate you. They feel empathy for you. It's a way to broadcast empathy or, get
that kind
empathy
of makes
back.
sense. That makes sense,
Unless you're
actually.
if they really hate you, like for instance, if I had thrown myself at the mercy of all these people and I'd said, I'm struggling with mental health, maybe it would work. Maybe I've
They'll call
seen
you crazy. Yeah.
no,
I mean,
and I
and
yeah,
and they won't say that it's ableist to call you crazy because they don't.
no,
If you're not liked, then it's all fair game. Like you see
right,
that all
like
the time.
Elon has
People call me
Asperger's.
ugly. Yeah, people call
Oh,
me ugly all the time. Like, and they'll like criticize my appearance and how my mouth moves, and it's
they
like
wish. They wish they could get one date with you. They're such losers. Don't
they are
listen to that
mostly
crap.
men. It is mostly men. It's not usually women. So it's there's no, but I get a lot of that. When I went on Tim Pool, and because I
Oh,
was
geez,
representing
wow.
the left, yeah, I
That's
got
big.
like,
That's a big show. It's a lot of people on that one watching that.
yeah, yeah. Well, a lot of people wrote me messages after. They're like, you're actually a reasonable left leaning person, and like,
Oh,
thanks.
that's
But
nice.
but also there were people who were like writing how, look, she has evil eyes like all those leftists do, and it was just very like that. I didn't, I've now learned not to be better about reading comments. They don't all get like, I don't take it that personally, but I think the volume sometimes can get to me, but it is kind of fascinating though too. They will never like if somebody said that about somebody they liked, it'd be like, how dare you criticize this person's
Yeah.
looks?
Well, that's
And
seriously, that's why I don't go on video. I did it for you, but I usually don't because I don't want to
thank you.
hear that shit. That
No, and women get more like
women get it, yeah. Even though I'm old,
significantly
like it doesn't even matter anymore, but there's still a part of you that is
still.
vain, that wants you to
Oh yeah,
people to
yeah.
see you as attractive. But I'll tell you this, one thing I've learned from being online for 30 years. I've been online for 30 years since 1994 is that there are two basic tribes on the internet. One are virtue signalers and one are trolls. And the virtue signalers became the left and the trolls became like 4chan and the right.
Mm,
And it's part of their personality to be that way online, to say those things. That's sort of who they are. That's their calling card, like it is on the left with the virtue signaling. Um, for me, like it's made it a little bit easier for me to tolerate them. I'm just, oh, that's just the trolls, and not to take it so personally because and when I see the virtue signalers, I also don't generally respond to them because I just feel sad. I feel bad, that
mm.
they feel the need to do that.
It's a good way of
Anyway.
it's a good perspective, I think, to have. What's kind of your plans going now that your life has shifted a little bit?
Well,
Are movies still going to be part of it?
I don't know. My website
Mm,
cost me 500 a month to run it, and it's a lot of work. I've been doing it a long time, 25 years, and I don't really want to keep doing it because nobody seems to want me. I have some readers who love what I do, and my traffic's never been better. Like people want to like peer at the crazy maybe, but
or
I
maybe they're genuinely curious. Yeah.
maybe they like to hear someone speak their mind when in an
I
industry
think
where no
that
one
is
does.
I think that's true. I think there. Listen, since I've become more public, I guess I had a lot of people who reached out to me or followed me from the film industry. I have people who I've worked with who send me like secret messages. Like
See, I wish
it's.
they'd just come out. That's
I wish
ridiculous.
so too. Some of them have, some of them haven't, and there's a lot of people. Even like I worked on movies and on film sets since all of this, and I spoke really openly and had no issues, and people were awesome and had very interesting thoughts and feel a lot of the same things. So I think the number of people who actually probably, specifically when you're talking about film and want that like honest perspective and just and on life, I think that's a lot more people than
Yeah.
sometimes it seems because they just
I
don't speak.
Absolutely, but there's definitely a dividing line where Trump is concerned. I call it the Trump line. If you don't cross that line, they'll still treat you like a human being. They might be mean
Mm,
to you and everything, but once you cross that line to them, that's a license to dehumanize. And then you're not a person anymore. You've been unpersoned. And that's a scary thing to experience from people that you knew and admired. So I don't know. I was hoping that after Trump won that they would kind of snap out of it a little bit, but I see it's not really happening that way. The hysteria is mounting daily. Like it's just getting worse and worse. So I don't know what.
mm.
I mean, we're gonna have a civil war, like a hot civil war. Is that what's coming next?
There's been a lot of talk. That talk was mostly from the right, but I am seeing some of that from the left. I see people who are genuinely scared for their lives, and it's.
Mm.
I didn't expect that. I thought maybe it would cause, hey, we've strayed them to go like, hey, we've strayed a fair bit. We need to kind of rein it in and reach out to people. And you even saw that in Kamala's campaign. I think she was, I don't know if people agree with me, but I do think she was trying to reach to the center. And she just wasn't maybe that believable in it or, whatever.
Yeah,
But I did see that intention from the party, from the Democrat Party. So I think they're maybe from a strategic perspective more aware of that. But from people, I was quite surprised at how many just became a lot more scared and hyster like they're genuinely afraid, right?
I
Like,
know. They really do think that they're in Paris and Hitler's marching in. I wish I could make them not afraid anymore and just understand that that's not what's happening. This isn't as scary as you think it is, and it'll be
I think
okay.
I have a lot of concerns myself, but I think that mine have a lot to do with like foreign policy in particular. But I think that there is still substantial difference between like a long time business guy who has a lot of narcissism to him and is not particularly honest often, but versus being full on Hitler who wants to
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think he wants to kill immigrants, right? Whereas I know there are people who genuinely believe that and that he would want to do that, and smart people, like really
How much
smart.
but how much better off would they be if they just dealt in the real world? Like, they would be so much more persuasive other than going to this
Mhm.
crazy place. But people know it's not true. I mean, that's why Trump won, I think, because of the crazy on the left. Personally, that's how I see it. But
No, he 100% won because of that. I don't
and
think a
they
lot of people.
lost. I was telling my friend all the time, like, you guys lost the election and you could have won it, and that's
I
the
think
thing they
if they
should
had
realize.
realized they turned what the issue was and not dehumanize people, they would have won. I think there's a lot of look, there are some people who love Trump and they're like, this is their king and all that. Those people are gonna, of course, vote for him. There's a lot of people that I saw coming from the left who were just not happy with the way that the structures have been operating and the institutions and all of that. And so it was more of a vote of like, we want something different, we want to change, we can't.
Give
and
us a
and people get
choice,
mad. Yeah, and I've seen friends of mine are like mad at people who just didn't vote, right? And I kind of get it. Like, I understand that not voting is like a vote in a way, and it's also it's like abdication of certain kind of responsibility. So I get that perspective, but at the same time, it's like when you really hate all the options, like why should you reward one side of it with a vote? I think I even with me, like in the past where I've been really unhappy with the choices, I made sure I went to vote because I wanted to show that I care about voting, and I spoiled my ballot
Mm,
intentionally. So that's kind of how I dealt with it when I was
yeah.
very unhappy. Is it the right? I don't know. Maybe I am, being terrible,
No,
but
it wouldn't
that's
have
how I
mattered.
dealt
It
with it.
wouldn't have mattered. I mean, look, he won the popular vote. Like, the
No.
fact that that
Well, I
didn't
didn't
make
vote in
Demo
America, so just to be
Oh, okay.
clear.
Oh, are you
Yeah.
Canadian?
I'm Canadian,
Oh,
yeah.
you're Canadian. Okay, okay.
Which we're the most hated people now, apparently. Like we
No, not really. Nobody likes him, but they don't mind Canadians. They don't like Justin
mm,
Trudeau, but
I don't like him either, but I do think that yeah, the rhetoric against Canadians now, I'm like, what did this happen?
no. It's a very hot time. Everybody's screaming at each other, it's like I wish we could rein it in. I wish we could be, sometimes I think we need war because without war, this is what we are. And that once you have a war, it resets everything and everybody gets along again and everything's fine again. And that you get to this point where there's like a war that has to be fought. When I look at the previous Civil War, and people say, oh, they switch sides, the Republicans are on the left but I don't think so because the South was very much its own little world just like the left before this election. And they were clinging to the past and holding on to this utopian world that they'd created. It's just that they wanted to keep slavery and the rest of the world didn't. They wanted to move on from it. They wanted, to expand and to bring the country into the modern world, but the South wanted to hold on. And so even after the Civil War, they held on to that. And they
Mm.
continued to demonize the newly freed slaves. And they created the Jim Crow laws and the KKK and all that to preserve the past, the order of the past. And people say that's what Trump did, but I don't see it that way. I see the left as the side holding on. It's time to move on from the Obama coalition. That era is over. It's time to move into a new one, whatever the new one's going to be. Find your leaders. That's how
I
I
hope
see
they
it.
do. I hope they do. And,
Yeah.
as somebody who might become an American citizen at some point, if Canada doesn't become, if Canada becomes the 51st state,
No, it won't. But that's why would
we
you want
won't.
to?
No, I
Canada's
don't want.
great.
I
Yeah.
don't want it. But I'm kidding. A good pathway to citizenship, though. But they're saying that like we won't get to vote. No,
Oh.
no. But I've lived in the U.S. and I do care about the U.S. I
Yeah.
can't vote there, which is fine. It's easier this way,
That's
honestly.
right. I hear that.
I
Yeah.
didn't have to make that choice, so I'm like happy about that.
Yeah.
Um, but it's I do hope that they find I want both sides to have better leaders, and I want and it's not just the leaders, but it's just the whole institution has to be. And the left, I really want to see them sort of fix themselves. But
Me
speaking of
too.
fixing themselves, I think we went off after I had asked you like what your plans are going to be.
Oh,
But
that's all right. Yeah. I have to walk my dogs pretty soon here. It's almost 5, so I have to hang
that's
up.
the plan.
Oh,
That
okay.
that that, that was
Um,
gonna be that was gonna be that's
yeah.
why I was leading with that question because it was
Oh,
gonna
I'm
be my
sorry.
wrap up.
Okay, I'm so sorry. What was the question? No, what am I going to be
What's
doing
next for
now?
you? Yeah.
Well, I will probably move my website to Substack and I'll continue to write about film awards, but I won't be doing it on my HTML site because it's too much money and I don't have the energy to do it. So once I do that, I can be more free to write the things I want to write about the awards and about film. I'll continue. People love my writing and I love to write, but the other stuff is not necessary anymore. I don't need to be the person that reports on the awards because there's so many different other sites that do it. And I don't
Mm.
need to be part of it anymore. And I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to keep continuing to do podcasts, more video content. I've got a little bit of a platform now and I'm just going to build out on it. I think that one of my goals is that the right doesn't have any culture because the left abandoned them. I was part of it. And
Mm.
everybody needs culture. We need books, we need movies, we need art, we need poetry. And I want to be part of this counterculture revolution that's starting to bring culture back to the right. So I'm going to be doing a lot of fiction stuff, a lot of fiction podcasts and you know, I mean, look, I'm old. I'm not going to tell you my age, but just put it this way, I don't have a lot of time left. So for this to be happening to me at this age, I have to try to do that thing where I look at it as an opportunity, an open door instead of, it's a way to end one world and begin a new. I think that one of the problems for the right is that they don't have culture and I think everybody needs it. And
You have David Mamet now, which is
We have
he's
David
a
Mamet
cultural icon. Yeah.
and Walter Kern, like there are these great voices. And I think little by little the freedom is going to start to bring culture back, and that's what I'm looking forward to. Real culture, good movies.
And I hope that's like, good culture transcends those lines.
Absolutely.
So
And it's uniting.
it's uniting. So I hope that that's where it goes. And I
Mm.
appreciate agree or disagree, and we certainly have both things. I think it's important to have authentic voices and people are willing to say what they actually think. And it's too bad that we too often vilify people for that. But I hope to continue hearing your voice, and I'm glad we got to have this conversation. So
No,
thank you
thank you
so
so much.
much.
Thank you so much for asking me, and I really admire you. I admire your courage. You have courage that is unlike anyone I've seen online, and I really do
Really?
admire it. I respect it. I think it's great that you never given up your principles and all the times I've been following you. You never tell people what they want to hear. It can be irritating at times because if you don't agree with it, but I admire that. I really do. I admire someone who stands like that in the middle, which is where you stand, and you don't take anybody's side. That's something I don't see very often. In fact, maybe not at all.
Hmm.
So, thank you for
I
that. Thank
appreciate
you for providing that voice.
I appreciate that, and it's interesting because as a people pleaser, this is not where I thought I'd end up.
Well, I hope you keep being that person and you expand on that and you keep writing and write movies and make movies maybe, and who knows,
Thank you.
right? Okay,
Who
thank
knows?
you.